Good evening. Good evening and welcome to City Hall. It's very nice to see such a large turnout for this evening's press conference. The press conference tonight is to provide more information regarding the process of code enforcement. At the conclusion of the mayor's remarks, the mayor and staff will be available for a few questions. In addition, at the conclusion of the press conference, mayor, some staff, and maybe some aldermen will be available to speak to people one-on-one. Without much further ado, I'll introduce Mayor Randy McClement.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you all very much for coming out tonight. First, I'd like to recognize some people here tonight. We do have Alderman Michael O'Connor, Alderman Kelly Russell, Alderman Donna Kazemchik, Alderman Josh Bokey, and Alderman Phil Dacey is away at a conference and could not join us tonight. I'd also like to recognize some of the staff that has joined me here tonight. We have, let's go from this side, Zach Kirshner, Director of Public Works, Dan Hoffman, Manager of Code Enforcement, Joe Atkins, Deputy Director of Planning, Captain Grossman, Police Department, Michelle Bowen, Police Department Community Outreach, Sandra Nichols, City Attorney, and Scott Waxter, City Attorney. Thank you. I've called this press conference to correct some of the incorrect and incomplete information floating around via columns in the newspaper, emails, and Facebook. I want to provide you with detailed information from the city. In my opinion, the information currently out there does not accurately show the whole picture. Let me start by saying up front, and right off the bat, that we understand that the vast majority of the concern of residents and business owners have stemmed from a handful of properties along Market Street owned by one entity. I'm here today to clarify some of the misconceptions regarding code enforcement, vacant properties, to talk about the definition of blighted property, receivership, and to inform you of some new communication tools we'll be implementing to help address these concerns. We are currently passing out a pamphlet that we created that includes detailed information about code enforcement and their role in the community. Susan will be doing that now. There are a few things that I would like to stress about code enforcement. The primary goal of the city is compliance with any violation of the city code. There are a number of different codes that this department helps to monitor. Examples are property maintenance code, historic district commission violations, building permit violations, health and safety violations, just to name a few. We are responsible for enforcement of code violations on residential and commercial properties within the entire city. We accomplish this task with a team of 8 people, a manager, 5 code enforcement inspectors, and 2 administrative staff. Let me give you an idea how busy this department stays. From January 1st to today, code enforcement has recorded over 872 cases. In 2013, code enforcement didn't hit 872 until mid-July. We attribute this to greater awareness on the part of our residents in regards to what a code violation is and the process to report that violation. One concern we have heard is that all complaints are not being addressed. This is not true. Once a complaint is filed with code enforcement, a case number and inspector are assigned. The inspector will go out to the property, determine if there's a violation or not, and if the complaint is valid, issue a notice of violation. That being said, every situation is different. Let me give you some examples. Let's take grass. Someone complains that there's what they believe is a violation of tall grass at, say, one of their neighbors. The code receives the violation. They log it in. They go out to the property. They place a notice of violation, give them the time associated with the code to correct. At the end of that time period, they go back. If the violation is corrected, the violation is closed. There is no violation after that point. The violation is not corrected. There is a contractor assigned to go to the house, cut the grass, and a lien for that charge is placed against the unit. If, let's say, a couple weeks later, another complaint about the same property, about the same thing, grass, the same thing happens. Inspector goes out, verifies it, code violation a notice of violation is put on there, contract, after the days are given, there's no compliance, contractor is assigned, but this time, contractor gets assigned, additional portion will be assigned as a lien, but there will also be a violation attached. There'll be a fine attached to that as well. Another example is, say, a broken window, say downtown, broken window. You go out, same thing happens, okay? But one of the things then a notice of violation is put in, but one of the things that we want to emphasize is that sort of each violation comes with its own ability to be corrected. Grass is kind of easy, but a broken window downtown may have a number of circumstances with it. Maybe it's a special glass because we're in the historic district. They can't get this glass immediately. So they'll look and they'll say, yes, we got to get this. It's going to be a special order. It's going to take us 4 weeks. Code enforcement works with them, but a notice of violation is still placed, and they're given enough opportunity to correct it. Then they'll go back to make sure that it's the time frame allotted, that is corrected. If it's not, then once again, the notice of violation is put on and a fine is assessed. Once corrective action is taken by either, let me back up. One of the things is also, as I say, to give you an example, the grass is a violation of city code. A broken window is a violation of the property maintenance code. So each of them come with different ways of enforcement. Once corrective action is taken by either filing for a building permit, applying for Historic District Commission or Planning Commission approval, or construction is started, the violation is put on hold. All of us look to continue achieving the goal of a thriving city, where every rentable space is filled, homes are not left empty, business owners are successful, and our residents and visitors have no shortages of places to shop and eat. The fact is, try as we may, properties throughout the city are vacant. Vacant properties are not necessarily blighted properties. Now, perhaps the biggest misconception in the public has been the definition of a blighted property. Blighted means an unoccupied structure that is a serious or immediate danger to health, safety, or general welfare of the community, as determined by the Director of Public Works. In determining a structure is a serious or immediate danger to health, safety, or general welfare of the community, the Director uses the following 5 criteria to justify this determination. 1, is unsecured against unauthorized entry. 2, is attracting illegal activity and calls for police service. 3, is a fire hazard. 4, creates a substantial and unreasonable interference with the reasonable and lawful use and enjoyment of the surrounding area. Or 5, has windows, doors, roofs, floors, siding, or foundation that are seriously damaged, missing, or structurally unsound. To clarify, these are the criteria determined by the properties that determine the property's serious or immediate danger. The property does not necessarily need to meet all 5 criteria. The city evaluates properties on a case-by-case basis to determine if they can be considered blighted. Once a property is designated as blighted, the city may petition the court for appointment of a receiver under our receivership ordinance. Receivership is yet another tool in our toolbox to gain compliance from previously non-compliant property owners. Please note, we do not take receivership lightly. It is the taking of property, and we make sure that we have all the facts and data prepared, because this is a court action and we must prove it in court. The timeline for a permit on a prominent property has recently expired. Our staff followed this closely and issued allowable fines, and will continue to follow protocol and issue subsequent fines until compliance is achieved. This is all to my point. We have done all of this without calling attention to every fine and notification of violation. We have been and will continue to strive for compliance of our code through consistent enforcement and ever-increasing severity of consequences for repeat offenders. I will admit that we haven't always done the best to provide a way to allow the general public the ability to follow up on outstanding code violations. I've heard you, and I've gathered my staff today because they've helped me determine what we can do better. So, going forward, the newly appointed Director of Public Works, Zach Kirshner, will be responsible for coordinating the activities between the permits, code enforcement, planning, and the police department. This coordination will ensure that all agencies are working in a unified effort to fairly apply the codes and gain compliance through public outreach and enforcement. We want to make sure we have in place appropriate communication tools. The handout that you have is the first step. We want all residents to understand the policies and procedures. The second step is giving you the opportunity to follow cases as often as you want online. As I mentioned, code enforcement simply does not have the staff to respond to citizens' requests to regularly update them on the status of every complaint. So now you'll be able to do that yourself. We have published code enforcement data for 2013 and 2014 on our Spires GIS General Map application. This will give you the ability to locate any code enforcement violation and pull up the detailed information on the case, including the assigned inspector, the origin of the case, the date, the case type, violation, and status. And Nikki's going to walk through this as we go through this. And I did forget to mention Nikki Beaumonte sitting over there, my executive assistant, and Susan Harding, our PIO. You can access the information very easily from our homepage. Just click on Spires GIS on the left. Then, under General, click Open Application. Check the box for code enforcement, and you can search the entire city. Over the next month, city staff will be developing a more detailed application that will provide even more functionality. And finally, it is my opinion that we do need to have a workshop, the purpose of which should be to review the rules in place and see if there's any way to enhance our current policies. The aldermen and some citizens have requested this, and our workshop schedule is currently extremely busy, but I have scheduled this for Wednesday, April the 2nd. Workshops start at 3:00 p.m. I know most of you wish this could happen sooner, but I also ask that you take into consideration that some of the current policies that we have in place have been in place for less than 1 year, and we need to give them some time to work. I want to note that the reason I brought staff up here today to stand up behind me is to reflect the number of people in the city, the staff in the city, that address code enforcement. It's not one person or maybe a handful of people. The people up here represent most of the management within city staff. They have people underneath them, so you can see that we take code enforcement seriously and we address it full-heartedly. The staff and I want to thank you for being here today. We understand your concerns and appreciate you bringing them before us. I hope that this information was helpful and may clarify what we here at City Hall are doing to encourage others and to take care of their property for the safety of all residents. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you. We do have time for a few questions. I would ask that when you do ask your question, please be specific as to whom you are directing it to. so we can make sure we have them up to the microphone. If you have a question, please raise your hand, and Nikki will bring the microphone to you.
Hi, I'm Ned Bond from the Black Cat Store. We're right next to the Asiana. Some of you have probably heard from me recently. My main question is this. I filed a code complaint online recently for the plumbing and electrical and framing that had gone into the Asiana without permit. I was told by code enforcement inspector that because there was an open permit in the Asiana, that all permit or all code-related issues were to be directed to permits department and not code. Why is this?
Thank you, sir. Zach Kirshner, Director of Public Works. At the point that the permits were applied for by the property owner, at that point the notice of violation is shelved, and we work with the property owner to take them through the permit process. Now, in this particular case, the property owner applied for a demo permit, and when it came to our attention that they were actually doing construction under that permit, we did issue a stop work order requiring them to obtain additional permits. They obtained additional permits for what were basically facade type improvements to the interior, not major structural renovation. At that point, we again told them they needed to submit permits for the work they were actually doing, and we also provided a letter to them dated January 6th that I can certainly provide, giving them this direction and giving them the deadline by which they needed to submit those permits, which at this point has lapsed, and why the fines have been issued.
I understand the original stop work order had a 5-day window of time that if they did not meet that, then there would have been fines. So that seems to be ignored. So this new timeline was a totally different set of permits. So there's a confusing issue there. Mm-hmm. My last question really is, I have more issues about that building. Mm-hmm. Do I file code enforcement complaints? Where do they go?
At this point, if you have an issue that you believe is a code violation, contact code enforcement. They will bring it to me and to my building division manager, and we will determine whether or not it's permit related. But go ahead and submit it to code enforcement. That way they will put a case into the system, and it will be followed. Thank you.
Just a quick question of clarification. You mentioned a 5-day code that you heard of. This is one of the things I want to get concerned and have this ability right now. If you've heard something, please ask that question. If we were wrong, we'll admit it. But instead of working off rumors, we'd really appreciate you saying.
It's not a rumor, it's a document.
What's the document?
It's the original stop work order that went out to the roads.
So there was a 5-day order on it?
I'm not sure it was 5 days. The deadline was November the 13th.
Okay.
And it went out the 7th.
I would have to review that. Assuming that they actually stopped work, they would be in compliance with the stop work order. But if they continued work without a permit, then they would certainly be not in compliance and they could be fined.
It took all the mayor's office to get them to stop work. But I can bring that document, I can email it back to you if you'd like.
Okay. No, I have it, but I'll take a look at it and confer with the mayor. Thank you, though.
Any more questions? Yes.
Hold on, Dave.
Wait 1 second. Over
Dave, hold on. We got someone over here.
Take him first, and then I'll take you next. Go ahead.
Okay. I'm just curious, is there any type of repeat violator type of enforcement there? So if it's the same person that keeps on having the same issues, that they would be treated differently?
That's something we want to address with the workshop. I know that some of the aldermen have brought that to my attention. That's something that we need to work forward on. We need to have a set standard of how that's going to operate, but that's something we definitely should look at.
No, you need it for the.
Good evening. My name is Dave Cook. I'm restoring a house in the historic district. I've only lived here in Frederick for 19 years. 20 yards behind my house is a 3-story building with smashed windows, no roof. This morning we had to have law enforcement come over, as Mr. Grossman knows. It's been secured, unsecured, back and forth. It's been that way for 18 years. You've been in office for 4 years. Some of the aldermen have been in office for 4 years. Come on. What do we have to do?
I'll take a shot at that. Part of the process is we didn't have anything in, we had some things in place that we may not have used correctly. Receivership is probably the next best thing we can do. I'll have to look to see when it was reported. Sometimes, we can't see everything. And if you say that it's there, it's now been filed, we'll make sure that we start the process now. I'll be honest with you, don't know about it. So I will make sure that we'll follow up and see what we can do. Okay. Oh, we're talking about the property, so you're talking about the ones with the fake facades. The ones with okay.
And some is a three-story building with smashed windows and homeless people.
Okay, again, have there been any code violations on that?
I know, Dave, you met one of my inspectors out there 2 days ago, was it? Yeah, we secured the back door, and that's part of the process that we're taking with all the blighted buildings that are popping up now all of a sudden. So that is on our radar. They're being reported. I don't want to insult your intelligence, but that's not what I meant to say. We are making a list, a blighted list. We're degreeing them in 3 tiers as far as if it's grass and weeds, that could be considered blight. If there's a vehicle in the driveway or in the yard, that could be blight. Okay, that's a different degree than what you're talking about. Okay, that's going to go to the top of our list. We just started putting together that list. We are aware of that building. I know Buddy Singer's been there with you several times. He secured that door himself. Captain Grossman's been there. We are aware of that property. Okay, if we could wave that wand and have every building occupied, we would do that. Trust me, I would do that in a minute to make this go away. But it's going to be a process, and we're just going to have to work through it.
That's all the time we have now for questions. Thank you for coming tonight. That concludes our press conference. The mayor. What? The mayor and Board of Aldermen will be available.
Go ahead, one more.
Okay.
Go ahead. Hold on. We need the microphone.
Thank you. My name's Michael Paskowski. I live on East 3rd Street.
I'm sorry, sir. Can you
Sure.
stand up?
Michael Paskowski. I read the article in the Frederick News Post, and you alluded to it at your opening that maybe it was inaccurate. But I guess I was shocked to hear that the city was choosing not to exercise and to enforce laws or fines against the occupants. Could you please address that?
Yeah, I think I tried to allude to it, is the misconceptions that are out there. When a notice of violation is placed, and if the notice of violation is corrected, there is no fine. Unfortunately, we cannot sit there and say, just because you have a violation, we give it to you. We give you 5 days, cut the grass. You cut the grass. That violation goes away. It's done. If there is a broken window downtown, they're given 30 days to fix it. It goes away. They fix the glass, goes away. If the property is still vacant, it doesn't mean there's no violation. There's no fine. Now, in the case of the recent one that everybody's talking about, one property and one property owner that causes angst, we did everything by the rules, just like we would do with anybody in this city hall right now, fair and consistent across the board. That property owner has been able to live up to the code violation. When they get a code violation, they get certain days to do something. They've made it within those days, and they fixed it. That stinks, but that's the way it is. But when they didn't, as Zach Kirshner said, they were given till last Thursday to do the permits, to get it up to date. They were given the time frame that anybody else was given. They did not meet it, and violations were fines were put upon it.
You are levying fines against the owner?
It's already a part of the process. Fines were levied because, well, Zach's probably better to say exactly why the fines were levied.
Yeah, there were 10 notices of violation, so we levied the maximum fine for each of those, $1,000. These go back to walk through the building that our code enforcement staff did back in end of August, beginning of September. A complete list of notices of violations were provided to the property owner. They needed to acquire permits to address those, so we had to give adequate time for them to hire an architect or engineer and put the permits together. And they were given the deadline then, ultimately, of March 6th. This was back in a January 6th letter. And when they did not meet that, we levied the maximum fines. And if they do not continue, if they continue to not meet that, if they continue to not submit for permits to correct the notices of violation, then the city may choose to, again, fine them repeatedly. Sure. Yes.
Jennifer Doherty. The property in question, Asiana, was condemned by the city in April 2012, some 700 days ago. So the first fines that were possibly issued were last Friday. Now, why in the intervening 700 days was the city unable to come up with some other notice of violation, some other fine, perhaps lower than the $1,000 and cumulative $10,000 fines, which may or may not have been delivered to their right address? Why is it that 700 days pass, and only because residents and business owners are making noise is the city now taking action? 700 days, no other fines? What is the process for condemning a property? Does that mean it is blighted? Is it condemned? Does it mean it's blighted?
I would say, based on the definition that we have in our code, I would say condemned does not necessarily mean that it is blighted. There are various criteria, as the mayor discussed, that we would have to evaluate to determine if a property is sufficiently blighted. Unfortunately, I cannot speak beyond last August. I can certainly invite other staff up here to speak to that. But I can tell you since August that we've had a very regimented and succinct progress on that property as far as the city's action on the property. From walking through it at the end of August with the property owner to providing them with the notices of violation in October to requiring them to submit for permits, and then thanks to residents calling in and letting us know that they were doing work without a permit or that they were doing work that was not under that permit. We then followed through with the stop work orders and so forth and gave them time period that we believed was necessary to get the proper plans and permits in, and they failed to meet that deadline, and that's why they've now been fined. So hopefully that answers your question. I don't know if any other staff would want to speak.
You good?
Edward,
Sure.
Tribute Lagarde's 3rd Street. The other property that this particular landlord owns is 314 North Market Street. It also has been condemned for a long time. Mm-hmm. What's happening with it? Anything? I mean, these properties have been condemned for 2 years better.
Sure.
We're waiting.
You want to speak to that? Sure. Thanks.
The condemnations on 2 buildings that you're talking about, when they were condemned, they had occupants inside of them. Those were the livability issues. They were condemned for not having electricity, not having running water, to have a tenant. The tenants were removed. The condemnation stayed. Okay, so to reoccupy that building, she must have running water and electricity to have tenants. So that's why the condemnation still stays. There's no fines levied because there's no occupant inside that building.
Good evening. I'm Catherine Mackenzie, and I'm a citizen in downtown Frederick. I was a part of the Blighted and Vacant committee that came together in 2013 and 2012 at the discretion of the mayor. That committee came before and met for an entire year and came before the mayor and board of aldermen with a lot of different ways that they could improve code enforcement. And what I would like to know is, tonight, I haven't seen, all the things were voted on in October and they were passed and accepted by the Board of Aldermen, and it was to give the code enforcement new teeth and new ways to address code violations in the city. So what I'd like to know is if you could just do a run through and let us know what things, situations and resolve and things that we brought before you have been implemented to help you in the process of completing your mission in code violation and permits.
Since that the October meeting, when we brought in the receivership, that was a big part of it. We've opened up communications, was part of the things that we did today. We are in the process. We just received 8 Toughbook laptops for our code inspectors through the police department that are going to be programmed so we can operate from the street to gain access to who owns buildings for properties and maybe speed up the process of identifying owners to get the word out, to get things fixed. That is a huge development for us. Without having that list in front of me, we have made a lot of changes in our department as far as when we get a case, when we get a complaint, all complaints are filed as a case now. It used to be we'd get a case, we'd send an inspector out. If it didn't amount to be a case, we didn't make a case file on it. We're tracking everything now. With our GIS system, we can go in and do stat work, we can do plotting, we can see what neighborhood problems are. Repeat offenders are going to be able to track through this. We can start working on maybe doubling fines to repeat offenders. And we all need to work through our legal department to come up with some ways that possibly we could do some of this stuff. So we did take the recommendations seriously. We are trying to move forward. We're also under a budget restraint. So that has a lot to do with it too.
Dan and Mayor, maybe one of the things you could do is maybe through the Frederick News Post and the public media is go ahead and take some time and put a list out there of the recommendations that were accepted by the mayor and board, and maybe a little feedback on what has been implemented and where you're at in the different stages, and that would help give the citizens more information as to the new things that are being implemented to help you do your work.
Thank you.
We could do that, put that up on our website under the same scenario. Gil, go ahead.
Gil House, I'm a local historian, and I'm going to go with what I think was a code violation that hasn't been cleared yet, and that was done on September the 15th, 2008, and it has to do with a painted sign at Volt Restaurant. And I know it was put on hold for a while, so I think code enforcement can tell me whether that's actually been cleared out or not. And if it's not been cleared out, what are we going to do about it? I mean, that's 2008. That's, what, 6 years ago, almost. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. House. I'm Scott Waxter. I'm one of the assistant city attorneys. I believe what you're talking about is the window transom above or behind that sign. It was not a code violation. There was a historic preservation case and a historic preservation application that addressed that sign. And, excuse me, the removal of numbers from the window absolutely wasn't, as you say, a code violation. So it was there was discussion about whether or not it was a violation of the HPC application that they filed. So making sure I understand your question, there would be no code violation in that regard. I don't know if that answers your question, but that's what that was. There was no code violation assessed in that matter.
I'll get with you offline, okay?
Thank you. Sure. Sure. The mayor's asked me to just sort of touch. We've talked about a lot of words, and sometimes these get sort of confused. You talk about condemnation and blighted, and it's important to remember that a condemned property isn't necessarily always blighted. And a condemned property typically will be when someone calls in or a code finds that the conditions inside are unsafe or unsanitary or in some way not habitable. And so when they condemn it, that triggers the aspect of removing any certificate of occupancy that building would have. And so we get the people out so that they're safe and that there are no people inside, and that's what code enforcement's job is. It's at that point in time that the building owner then will have to seek to get permits before they can get their certificate of occupancy back. So if there is no one inside and the building is not otherwise having any structural defects, there isn't necessarily always going to be a code violation with that. It is just, as Dan said, You might just have a situation where there is no running water or there's no electricity that could support having residents there, but that doesn't necessarily require a code violation. And so it can be condemned and just not occupied and sit vacant, and that can happen. So if there's any confusion about that, I just wanted to sort of talk to that aspect of it.
Thank you. That concludes our press conference for tonight. The mayor, city staff, and some aldermen will be available after the press conference to talk with any of you individually and with the press as well. Thank you.